Hey guys, welcome back to releasethecraftin. Priscilla here with another episode of Storycraft. And today, guys, I'm telling you the story of the soldier and death. Last week I did the voice of death. If you haven't seen that already, it's linked in the playlist, which is in the description box below. Check it out. But I said I would do some more stories in this sort of realm of things to do with death because I just feel a little bit spooky. It's summer, so that's when I feel the spookiest. And yeah, we're gonna jump right into that. But before I begin, just so you guys know, I still have one journal left in my shop. For the people who are asking me if I had a journal available, I do. I have one left from the last series I did, and you can check that out, also linked down below. And if you would like to support me and what I do here on the channel, I have a Ko-fi, I have a Patreon, I also have an Etsy store, and you can check all those things out in the description box. It's below. Also, this is Storycraft. If there's a story that you would like to hear in this segment, you can leave it in the comments as a request, and I will do it. I always like doing requests, so definitely drop them in there, and I'll tell you a story. So at any rate, let's jump into it. So, our story begins like the best stories do, in the way, way long ago, and it stars a soldier who does not have a name. So for the sake of this story, his name will be Frank, because that's the first name I thought of. So Frank was a soldier who fought in a war. The war lasted 25 years, and he was super faithful, super loyal, and managed to somehow survive a 25-year war. He fought the entire 25 years, all for the sake of the Tsar, and at the end of the war, they gave him 3 biscuits and sent him on his way. So yeah, 25 years of his life at war, 3 biscuits, hit the road, Jack. And that's exactly what he does. Frank hits the road. And as he goes, he starts to sort of bemoan his luck because he feels like he wasted his whole life, essentially. At least the best part of his life, his youth. That feels like that probably went without saying. But he basically wasted it at war, and all he got left at the end of it, all he had to show for it, was 3 biscuits. And as he's sort of bemoaning his fate and trying to figure out what he's going to do with 3 biscuits to his name, he comes across a beggar who starts to do what beggars do. He begs. And he's like, hey, you know what? I don't have much in the world, but I got 3 biscuits, so my friend, you can have 1. And the beggar is super thankful, and he's like, oh my god, thank you so much. And he sends him on his way. Or he doesn't send him, he just like, thank you, sir, and then they part ways. That's what happened. And Frank continues walking, and he feels a little bit better, like he did something good with his 2 biscuits, now that he has 2. You know, he maybe spread a little good into the world, maybe left a little bit of a legacy behind. That man won't go hungry for a day, because of him, but he still feels a little bit downtrodden, a little bit like, well, I only have 2 biscuits now to my name, and, yeah, I just spent 25 years fighting a war with nothing to show for it, so what do I do? And he comes across another beggar who continues the trend that beggars have been doing in the story so far. It's still trending, and he begs him for anything, and he says, well, I don't have any money, friend, but I do have some biscuits. So he gives him 1 biscuit. And Frank's like, yeah, okay, no big deal. I'm down to my last biscuit. It's been less than 24 hours since I was given these biscuits, so I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do next before my last biscuit runs out. And, you know, Frank continues on his way. He walks for a couple more hours, and then he comes across a 3rd beggar. You guys, if you can't believe it, he comes across a 3rd beggar. And this beggar's like, please, sir, can I have something? Anything? And Frank is like, yeah, totally. So he breaks his last biscuit in half and goes to give the man a half. And then he's like, oh, this feels kind of shitty. I gave the other guy the whole biscuit. It would be really fucked up to give this guy half and keep the other half for myself, because this guy's no different than the other guys I was willing to share my biscuit with. So, because Frank is kind of a good guy, he hands over both halves of the biscuit. And the guy's like, wait, before you go, what would you like in return for your kindness? And Frank's like, oh no, I don't want anything, nothing at all. You have nothing, that's why you're a beggar, so I actually don't need nothing. I have that now. I am also the same as you. And the guy's like, hey, like, I have stuff. I might be a beggar, but I have stuff. So, like, do you want something? Just make a request. Any request. And I will surprise you if I probably have it. So the guy's like, okay, you do kind of remind me of the trash lady from the Labyrinth. So I think maybe I could go for like a pack of cards. I would like a pack of cards. Some entertainment for my days. And the guy's like, I got you. So he reaches into his little bag and pulls out a pack of cards. And he says, sir, this isn't just any card. These cards will never fail you. And the guy's like, okay. So Frank's like, yeah, great. So he takes the cards, and he's like, what a weird way to hand over a gift, but thanks, sir. I have cards, you have food, I don't have any food, and now I'm going to go about my way. And the guy's like, wait, one more thing. You see this sack I took the cards out of? And Frank's like, I do see the sack you took the cards out of. And he's like, well, are you interested? And Frank goes, it's a bag. I have one of those. And he goes, well, it's not just any bag, my friend. It's not just any bag. It's a special bag. Because you see, anything you tell to get into the bag will have to get into the bag. You can have this bag. This is for you. This is my gift because you were so generous. And Frank's like, that's a weird thing to give away when you're hungry on the road. But yeah, totally, I was like, give me that bag. Give me the bag. I'm not a fool. If I am nothing, it is not a fool. So Frank takes his cards, he takes his bag, and he heads out on his way. And he never asked any questions about who this mysterious third beggar was. Why he would just give away something that would cure his hunger. Or anything like that. He just continues on his way, because Frank is not a fool, you guys. And he doesn't have any questions to ask. So, as Frank goes about his day, he comes across a pond. At the pond there are some geese. He sees the geese and he goes, I wonder if this bag really works. So he throws the bag down on the ground and he says, hey, you geese, get in this sack. And you know what, you guys? The geese do. All three of them just crawl right into the sack. And he picks it up, closes the top, and continues on his merry way. And he continues until darkness starts to fall, and he comes across a little tavern. And he gets to the tavern, and he tells the tavern keep, hey, I have 3 geese in this sack. If you cook one for me and give me a room for the night, I'll give you the other 2. And the tavern keeper's like, oh, cool, yeah, like, totally. I love geese. Are they alive? Because that's a little concerning. They're a little bit terrifying. But I would love to eat a goose. But I don't know if I want to fight a goose. And Frank's like, yeah, no, they're totally alive. But they're in that bag. And there's 3. And so the tavern keep takes the sack of 3 geese to the back to go cook them, and hopefully not lose the battle in the war against geese. But Frank tells them before he walks away, make sure you bring back that sack. Because Frank is not a fool. He absolutely trusts that guy. And to his credit, the tavern keep does bring the sack back, as well as a beautifully roasted goose. Seasoned, herbed, buttered, all the things. So he brings this goose back. He also gives Frank a room and his finest cup of wine. So, Frank, living large for the evening, living well off his geese. Having a delightful evening, over a glass of wine, the tavern keep ends up joining him, and they sit down and they enjoy each other's company while they enjoy some succulent goose. And Frank looks out the window and he's like, hey, look at that big-ass castle over there. I've never seen that before. Is that new? And the tavern keep is like, oh, are you crazy? Of course that's new. That's the Tsar's new castle. So the Tsar himself had this castle built. It is the finest castle in the history of castles. It's got everything. Floors, windows, walls, doors, everything. But the finest everything. And, yeah, it's actually amazing, but nobody lives there. In fact, no one's been able to live there in the 7 years since it's been built. And Frank's like, well, why? And he's like, oh, because it's full of devils. Full of devils. Top to bottom, full of devils. Everyone who goes in there doesn't come out alive. The Tsar himself sent an entire battalion, an entire army, fleet, squad, whatever, into that castle. None of them returned. They were all killed by the devils. And the soldier's like, interesting. He's like, in fact, that's so interesting. I'm gonna go stay the night there. And the tavern keeper's like, are you crazy? I just told you an entire army of people died in there. Everyone who goes in there, they only find their bones in the morning. Like, you can't go in there. It's full of devils. And Frank's like, no, I managed to live through 25 years of war without dying. I can spend a night in that castle. And the tavern keeper is like, I'm not challenging you, sir. I want you to understand. I'm warning you. It's not a challenge. And Frank's like, no, no, no. I won't hear anything of it. I'm going. And so the tavern keeper's like, okay, I can't stop you, bro, but like your sack of geese, this is crazy. So Frank goes to the castle and decides instead of spending a night in a nice cozy tavern room, he's going to spend the night in the devil-ridden castle. And when he walks in, it's a spooky empty castle, as much as any spooky empty place is. But he hears a fire crackling away, so he goes closer to it, goes into one of the big rooms. There is a fire, in fact, burning in the grate. And around that fire is a little host of devils. And they're like, hey, welcome to our castle. Hey, why don't you come by the fire, warm yourself up, and play a game with us? And Frank goes, you know what, I would love to play a game with you guys. In fact, I happen to have a set of cards right here. So Frank sits down to play some cards with them, and he deals them all out. And he's like, okay, like, what's the bet here? What are we betting for? And the devils are like, oh, well, we have 60 barrels of gold, and you have your soul, also your life. So, ipso facto, that's what we're betting for. And Frank's like, okay, yeah, no problem. So he plays cards with the devils. And in fact, he plays cards with the devils the entire night, you guys, because, like the old beggar said, those cards never failed him. He never lost a single hand. No matter how much those devils cheated and schemed and changed the rules on the fly, Frank never lost a single game against those devils. And by the time morning came around, they were like, now we're all broke. You have every one of our barrels of gold, and you won't lose no matter how hard we try. I guess there's nothing left but to eat you up. Toes, fingers, knees, elbows, skin, hair, teeth, and all. And so Frank's like, interesting. Because that doesn't seem to be like the arrangement, but now I'm realizing that I didn't actually qualify that you would let me out of here alive. So, well, I'm not a fool. What I have here is a sack. You see the sack? And the devils are like, yeah, we know what a sack is. Just because we're devils doesn't mean we're dumb. And he's like, you're right. You're absolutely right. And since this is a sack, get in it. And they do. The devils, all against their will, crawl into the sack, and Frank closes it up, throws it over his shoulder, and heads on out the door. And he walks quite a bit. Quite a bit indeed. He walks until he gets to the next town. And when he gets to the town, he goes right up to the blacksmith, and he's like, hey, guys, I have a bag of devils. And they're like, devils? You have a bag of devils? That's a normal thing for people to say to the local town blacksmith. And he's like, yeah, in fact, it's so normal and regular, you shouldn't actually question the logic of it. But in this bag, devils. I'm going to put this bag of devils on your anvil. Take your hammers, beat the shit out of this bag. And that's what they do, because they're like, oh, yeah, we can do that. We're blacksmiths. Also, not inclined to like devils. So yeah, they beat the shit out of that bag. They take their big hammers and they absolutely wallop the life out of those devils. And the devils inside the bag are like, please, oh my god, it hurts so bad, let us out. We'll never be evil again. And Frank's like, I just don't believe you. Another round, please, gentlemen. And they do. They absolutely lay into him another round. All these devils screaming, crying, tears down their eyes, all the things. Except you can't see that, they're in the sack. But just use your imagination. They're definitely crying in there. And they continue to beg to be free. And they're like, please, we'll never bother you again. We'll never bother that castle again if you let us go. Please. And Frank's like, okay, yeah, no problem. But you have to go straight back to hell. No detours. You can't fuck around. You guys all go straight back to hell. And they're like, absolutely yes. Anything to get away from this torment. So Frank opens up the bag. He snatches the first devil that flies out. The rest of them all fly out in a big flurry and head straight back to hell. They kept their word. Because if devils do anything, they keep promises. But the last little devil, who Frank is holding on to, is like, oh my god, please, let me go, please. Everybody else gets to leave, how come I don't get to leave? And Frank's like, I'll let you go if you promise me, in a binding way, to, serve me faithfully the rest of your days. And the devil's like, the rest of my days? And Frank goes, well, maybe mine, you're right. And the devil's like, okay, yeah, anything to get away from you, you crazy man. So, the devil ends up giving him his foot. He's not using it, he can fly. So he gives him his foot, tells him he will serve him faithfully, and then flies off back to hell himself. And so, Frank goes back to the castle, gets as much of the gold as he can carry, and then goes and tells the Tsar, hey, I freed your castle. Totally free. No more devils. The tavern keep manages to vouch for him, probably because he also managed to come out of that arrangement like a bandit. And he's like, yeah, that guy was there the whole night, and he left with a sack of devils. The blacksmiths come through, and they're like, hey, this guy paid us, after the fact, to hammer the life out of some devils, and we watched him open up the sack and send them all back to hell. He definitely got them all from that castle, definitely freed you from the curse of these devils. So the Tsar is like so happy that he can finally move into his brand new castle with all the things, that he's like, hey, you come live with me in this castle. You're like a cool guy, and you just made me richer, so you should be richer. We should be rich together. And Frank's like, that sounds like a fucking deal. So Frank goes to the castle, and he lives it up to the Tsar. They're like best buddies, you guys. Like, they're living large together. And after a while, Frank marries. Within about a year, he marries. And about a year after that, he has a son. And everything is great. He's having a great time. Frank is living the high life for a couple of years until his son falls ill. And it's not just any illness. It's not just like a kid crud. No, this is like on his deathbed, barely breathing, wheezing. Everyone is upset. And they are praying for him. Like, his mom, his dad, praying day and night for this little boy to recover. The doctors are coming in, and they're like, ooh, no, we don't know what to do. So the doctors stop coming in. Instead, they start sending priests, because this little boy is on his last leg. And he's like, oh my gosh, what can I do to save my son? I love him so much. And then he remembers he happens to have a little devil's foot in his pocket. So he's like, devil, that serves me, where are you? You're not serving me at all. Where are you? And the devil crawls out of his pocket, and he's like, hey, I've been here with you the whole time. You have my foot. What can I do to help you? I am your faithful servant. And Frank's like, look at my son. He's dying. Can you cure him? And so the devil reaches into his little tiny pocket and pulls out a cup, a nice crystal glass cup. And he pours some water into it, and he walks over to the little boy, puts it above his head, looks through the cup, and he's like, oh, I see the problem. Do you see this? Come over here, Frank. Look in this cup. And so Frank comes over, he looks in the cup, and he's like, what do you see, Frank? And Frank looks, and he's like, I see. Is that shadowy figure Death? And in fact, it was Death standing at the feet of his son's bed. And the devil's like, oh, well, since Death is just at his feet, he's gonna live. Take a little water from this cup, sprinkle it on his head, he'll be right fine. So the soldier does that. He takes a little water, gets it on his fingies, sprinkles it on his son, and his son recovers immediately. And it's to the joy of everyone around. His wife is ecstatic, he's ecstatic, they're hugging him, they're kissing him, and then he looks at the devil and he's like, well, honestly, this was the coolest thing a devil has ever done for me. And the coolest thing you could do, bud. So, you know what? Give me the glass, and I will never bother you for anything else ever again. You're free to go. You're out of my service. And the devil's like, oh, was that it? Just one thing, and I'm free to go? I promise to serve you for the rest of your life. And Frank's like, no. I'm not a fool. I'm not a fool. Go. Give me the cup and get out of here. And the devil's like, say less, my friend. Just know, if death is at your feet, you're safe. If death is at your head, you only have 3 hours to live because you will die. And Frank's like, good to know. So the devil takes his foot, he fucks off. We never see the devil again. And then Frank is like, well, now I have this magic cup. I can see death. What else is there for me to do? Except for travel the country, curing people of their illnesses. And that's what Frank does. He takes his cup, he goes across the country. Every time somebody's sick, he goes to their house, he puts a little water in the cup, he looks through the cup, and he goes, oh, death is at your feet, sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle. You're cured. And he goes on his way. Sometimes, though, unfortunately, Frank is a little bit too late. He looks through the cup, death is at their head, he's like, I'm sorry, I showed up too late. There's nothing I can do. And he moves on, but people still pay him for his services. As a medical practitioner, I guess, medical wizard, people pay him either way because they know that if he could have cured them, he would have. And Frank, who was already fabulously wealthy, living with the Tsar, is now stupid rich from his years, that's right, years of curing people of illnesses, magically, with his little magic cup. So, everything is great. Things are looking up for Frank, except one day the Tsar falls ill. And they call Frank. They're like, hey, you're the Tsar's best friend. Get in here. Cure the Tsar. Do the cure thing that you do. And Frank is in there. He looks at his little cup and he's like, oh, no. Death is at your head. The Tsar is gonna die in 3 hours. Which is such an arbitrary number for no reason. And the Tsarina is like, you cure everybody, but you can't cure your best friend and the Tsar of our nation? Really? And so Frank's like, ooh, yeah, good point. So he looks through the cup and he looks at Death and he says, Death, take me instead. Leave the Tsar and take me instead. And Death is like, okay. All right, friend. I didn't know you could actually see me. That's what's been going on this whole time? You keep stealing people from me because you can see me? Okay. That's a little bit unnerving, but I'm gonna let you have it. I'll come for you. You got 3 hours, buddy. Go take care of business. And Frank's like, oh shit. Okay. So he goes back to his little room, says goodbye to his wife, says goodbye to his son, lays down on the bed, and is suddenly overcome with illness. The same illness that the Tsar had. And now his wife and his son are praying by his bedside, and they're like, oh my god, do your cup trick. And he's like, I can't, it's too late. I already did this, I saved the Tsar, but I sacrificed myself. And his wife is like, are you fucking kidding me? Why? But, whatever further conversations they had, not relevant to the story. Eventually gets to the point where when Frank looks through the cup, there's Death right by his head, and he goes, you only have 3 minutes. And the soldier, Frank, is like, you know what? You're right. Okay, let me just say my final goodbye. Goodbye family, goodbye wife, goodbye son, goodbye sack by my bedside. And that's like, the sack? You're going to say goodbye to the sack? And Frank goes, oh, this sack? You agree it's a sack, right? And Death's like, yeah, I know what a sack is. That's definitely a sack. And he's like, okay, cool. Get in it. And Death does. Death goes right into the sack. Frank ties it up. He jumps up, miraculously cured, not about to die. And he takes the bag, throws it over his shoulder, walks right out the door. His wife and kid are like, what? Did you just catch her Death in a sack? Is that sack always been magical? Or is it specifically for catching Death? You don't want to explain anything? You're just going to leave, Frank? Okay, bye. And Frank does. He just leaves. He goes out into the woods. It goes into the thickest woods, finds the tallest tree, climbs all the way up to the top, to the longest branch he can, walks out there, ties the sack to that branch, and then falls out of the tree. When he hits the ground, a fall that would have killed anybody, he gets back up and walks about his way. Because now, Death is stuck in the sack, and no one can die. And that's literally what happens. From that day on, nobody in the kingdom dies. In fact, nobody in the world can die. No matter what happens, no matter what injuries they get, what sicknesses they get, they never die. And this goes on for years. People who feel like they should die, they don't. The elderly who are like, I feel like maybe it's my time to go, they can't. People who are dying of horrible illnesses, eternally dying of horrible illnesses, because they can't, in fact, die. And it gets to the point where people are like, hey, how come we can't die? And the word starts to get around. Hey, that doctor that was curing everybody from death, he may have done this. He may have caught death. He saved the Tsar, saved himself, and doomed us all to eternity of sickness and illness and death injuries. Definitely deadly injuries. But I guess it's not so bad because we got more time to spend with our loved ones. But yeah, we can never die. So people start showing up at Frank's door. And they're like, hey, I want to die. I'm actually really tired and over this shit. Look at me. My neck is broken. I don't want to live like this. And Frank looks out the window every day and he sees these people just begging him to release death so that they can finally die. And he starts to feel bad. You might even say his heart grew 3 sizes that day. Because he's like, oh, shit. Okay. So, he goes out into the woods, climbs up that tree, manages to wrestle the sack down without falling from the tree again. When he gets to the bottom, he opens it up, and he's like, hey, Death, you still okay in there, buddy? And Death's like, yeah. Yeah, I am. And he's like, I'm sorry, Death. I'm just really sorry, guy. I shouldn't have stuck you in this sack. I should have just accepted that it was my time to go, so I'm ready. Go ahead and take me. And Death goes, oh, I shall fucking not. I shall not. And Death nopes right on out of there. Death doesn't even say goodbye. He zippity-doo-dahs right the fuck out of there. And Frank is like, what the heck? Death, you gotta take me. And Death's like, fuck you. As he disappears into the distance. And sure enough, the people who were supposed to die start dying. The people who wanted to die because they were so old, they died when it was their time. The people with horrible injuries die. And people start dying again like normal. Death is back at work. Everything is back to normal. Except for Frank. Frank never dies. He lives past his years. In fact, he lives 100 years. And watches his whole entire family grow old and die without him because he's not dying. So he's like, oh shit. Oh no. Don't like this. So he sets out to go find Death. But he can't. He can't find Death anymore. The cup isn't working. He can't see Death. He can't cure anybody. He just gotta go about his way. So he decides, okay, fuck it. I'm done. He just goes to hell. He walks and walks days and days and days until he gets to the gates of hell. And he goes, hey, let me in. I'm ready to be tortured in the fires of hell. Because clearly, I'm a bad guy. And I deserve to be here. And they open up the gate, the little devils, they peep through the little door. And they're like, oh yeah, totally, come on in. Like, we would love to have you. Wait a minute. What's that on your hip? And he goes, oh, this? It's just a sack. And they're like, a sack? Hell no. Stay the fuck away from us. You're Frank. We remember you. We're gonna live forever, so you can never come in here with your stupid, ugly sack. Which, like, Frank, why wouldn't you leave that sack at home? It's what got you in this trouble in the first place. But I digress. Frank is like, okay, well, I'm not fucking leaving because I'm supposed to be dead. So either burn me up or give me 200 souls you don't need anymore. And they're like, we're not giving you 200 souls. We'll give you 150. And Frank's like, okay, 150 or the sack? And they're like, no. 200 souls, you said? You can have them. We don't need these guys anymore. They're boring to us. So they release 200 souls. And Frank takes those 200 souls. And he goes, one more thing before I leave. Give me a map to heaven. And they're like, oh my god, you're so needy, but we don't want to be in the sack, so here is a map to heaven. So Frank takes the map to heaven, takes the 200 souls, and he's like, on to heaven. So they get up to heaven. And when they get up there, Frank's like, hey, God, buddy, pal, I'm ready to die. I brought 200 souls from hell with me. I freed them. Let me in, please? And God's like, no. No, you can't come in. The 200 souls can come in, but you can't come in. So Frank's like, okay, yeah, totally, yeah, but he stops the last soul before it goes in. He gives the soul his sack, and he's like, hey, when you get inside heaven, I want you to tell me to get in the sack. And then, let me out eventually. And the soul's like, yeah, totally, yeah, thanks for saving me from hell, absolutely. So the soul takes the sack and crosses the pearly gates into heaven, and Frank is waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, because what Frank doesn't know, you guys, because he might actually be kind of a bit of a fool, is that when you get into heaven, you don't remember anything from before you were in heaven. So that soul doesn't remember that he needs to tell Frank to get in the sack, and Frank actually waits for quite a time. In fact, he might even be waiting to this day, because we don't really know what happened to Frank. All we know is that death never took him. So either he waited outside the gates of heaven for all eternity, or he left and started to wander the world also for all eternity, unable to die. Because Frank is kind of a fool. And that's the end of the story. I love this story. I think it's great. It's also got remnants of Stingy Jack, which I also love, so I think that's why it's in my tops of stories to tell, or just fairy stories that I like to listen to. It's a Russian folktale, which is also delightful, and they actually did an episode of The Storyteller, Jim Henson's The Storyteller, about this story too, which is where I have this very vivid image of death as like a little man baby, because it had a little tiny person face, like a little baby face inside of like the shroud of death, you know, the Grim Reaper costume, but little baby face, but also slightly older man, like bald old man, baby face, death. It's worth Googling just to see the image of death in The Storyteller, because it's a treat. But I remember this episode very vividly because of that little puppet that they used for that. Also, I remember the devils in this episode because they were very punk rock. Like, they had piercings and a mohawk. But they were also like little tiny bat-winged, red-skinned little devils, which were super cute. But for some reason, they were very punk rock coded. I don't know why, but it's delightful. Jim Henson's Storyteller is delightful on its own for many reasons. It's right up there with Shelley Duvall's fairy tale theater. I don't think that's what it's called, but maybe it is. For like just nostalgia-rich, fantastic fairy tale stories. But yeah, I don't know. I really love this story. I like that the soldier is very clever, and then just to solve all of his woes with cleverness, but then is a little too clever for his own good, because it ends up biting him in the ass in the end. And yeah, I just like it. I like the story. I think it's fun. I don't know off the top of my head if I'm going to do another one of these, like, defying death stories, but, you know, we'll see what comes up. Let me know what you guys think about the story in the comments below. How much of a fool do you think Frank is? I'm really curious to genuinely know. And that's going to be it for me for now. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate your faces, and I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Until then, happy crafting. Bye!